Hi, I'm Devon, the creator and designer behind Aurora Lee Designs, and this is a video tutorial for the Wythe Valet tray. Our first step is edge painting along the four corners of the tray. I've also included in the kit a small piece of scrap leather, and you can practice painting on that before painting the actual piece if you'd like to do so. When working with the edge paint, you want to apply a thin layer of paint at a time. You will use your edge paint applicator to apply the paint just to the leather's edges, and I recommend using a small dabbing motion as opposed to long sweeping strokes, as that will just help you control the paint better. Once you've applied the initial layer of edge paint around all four edges of the tray, you want to set it aside to dry for about 30 minutes or until all of the edges are fully dried and hardened before you move on to the next step. I recommend setting the tray on top of a bowl or something elevated just so that the wet edges won't touch anything while they dry. Once those edges are fully dry, we are going to move on to sanding them down and applying additional layers of edge paint. When working with the sandpaper block, you just want to make sure that it is held flush against just the edge of the leather so that it won't scratch or mar the face of the leather. The goal of sanding is to smooth down our painted edges. You definitely don't need to get it perfectly smooth on this first round. I would just sand it a bit until it's noticeably smoother to the touch. Once you've sanded around the four edges, you are going to apply a second layer of edge paint and set this piece aside to dry again for about 30 minutes. If you'd like to, after the piece is dry, you can do another round of sanding and painting. I ended up doing one more round for a total of 2 rounds of sanding and 3 coats of paint. As our final step, we are going to be sewing together the 4 corners of the tray. We're going to be sewing them together using a saddle stitch, which is a very common method of hand sewing in leather craft. If you want additional instructions on how to saddle stitch, I also offer a video tutorial specific to saddle stitching on my YouTube channel. We will be sewing the corners together with the interior lining sides touching and the V shape of stitching line along the corners closed together so that the corresponding stitching holes are lined up. First, you'll take your bundle of thread and measure out a piece of thread that is a bit longer than 4 times the length of one of these stitching lines along the corner. Cut out your piece of measured thread from the bundle and then thread a needle onto each end. Next, take one of your corners and fold it so that the 2 stitching lines that form a V are matched together and all of the corresponding holes line up. Next, take one of your sewing needles and thread it through the 2 corresponding stitching holes closest to the edge of the corner. Pull together both of your needles so that there's the same amount of thread on each of them. Before we begin our saddle stitch, we are going to seal together the top of this corner. So you're going to take one of your threaded needles and loop it over the top of this corner seam and then thread it back through that first set of stitching holes that we just sewed through. Now your corner should be sealed tightly together with the thread looping over the top, and as at the beginning, we will have a threaded needle on either side of the leather. To begin our saddle stitch, we'll take one of the threaded needles and thread it through the next open set of corresponding stitching holes moving down the corner. Pull it through so the thread is tight, and then flip over the piece and take your needle coming out of the very first set of stitching holes and loop it through that same set of second stitching holes that your other needle just came through. Pull the threads tight, and this will form your first full saddle stitch. It will look exactly the same on both sides of the leather, and as at the beginning, we will have a needle coming out of either side of the leather. Continue this saddle stitch all the way down the stitching line, each time taking one of your threaded needles, threading it through the next set of open stitching holes, and then flipping the piece over and taking your opposite needle and looping it through that same set that the other needle just came through to form your full saddle stitch. If you have them available, I recommend having a pair of needle nose pliers on hand, as this can help with the sewing process when the needles are getting stuck in between the layers of leather. Once you've sewn down the entire stitching line, we are going to finish the stitch by sealing the corner exactly as we did in the beginning. And you want to take one of your threaded needles, loop it over the top of the bottom corner, and then thread it back through those same last set of stitching holes. Finally, to finish off the stitch, we are going to back stitch 3 times, which is exactly the same process as saddle stitching, just moving in the opposite direction and overlapping your stitches so that the threads will be sealed together and won't unravel. So to start our back stitch, we will take one of our threaded needles and move back one set of stitching holes and then thread the needle through. This is definitely a time when the needle nose pliers can come in handy, as it can be a little bit tight stitching back through these holes. Once you've sewn that first needle through, you are going to flip the piece over, take your opposite needle and thread it through that same set of stitching holes. Repeat this 2 additional times and then cut the thread off as close to the face of the leather as possible. Once you've finished back stitching and cutting off your threads, repeat this process on the 3 other corners and then your tray will be complete. Thanks for watching this video tutorial. I hope you had a lot of fun making your new tray. And if there are other products and designs you want to see featured, feel free to let me know in the comments, as I'm always working on new designs.